Okay, do you want to start?
Hi, my name is Paige. I'm a senior at Rice High School, and I really like to write.
I'm Carol Hockey, Paige's mom, and I'm very interested in the history of the wars and the folks that served in them, because I did not pay much attention to my history classes when I was in high school. I'm catching up.
I have a little hard of hearing, so you'll have to speak up a
Okay.
little bit.
I'm Brendan Walsh. I'm Jonathan Walsh's father, and I too daydreamed in history class in high school and am very interested to hear your story.
No, Peter.
You're next.
I'm Jonathan, and I want to listen to history in high school.
Jonathan, excellent response.
And I'm Peter Cook, and I was a history major in college, so that's kind of my love and passion. So I'm always down for another historical lesson. So.
I'm Toby Young, and I am probably going to major in some kind of history in college.
I'm Jake, and yeah, pay attention to history, I guess.
I'm Katie. I don't know what I'm supposed to be saying.
Something about yourself, Katie.
I know those two are hockey players.
Actually, this one, yes, Katie is.
Oh, yeah, Toby's my brother. There we go.
That's okay. I'm Beth. I'm a junior at Colchester. I like to play music, classical music.
Beautiful. So, and I'm Lucy, and I want to just tell the story of knowing Bruce for quite a few years. I joined the church a long time ago, but about 6 or 7 years ago, Bruce invited me to his camp, which is up on the shores of Grand Isle, and he wanted me to pick up some mattresses that were going to some refugee households. So I got to come and see his camp and put the mattresses in my car. And we had a nice visit, and I've never had a conversation with Mr. Cram where I haven't left feeling like, what a gentleman, what a nice man. And but this time when I was leaving, I looked over at the car and it said POW. And you know, for me, that brought back memories of my friends being drafted to go to Vietnam. And when I started college, the draft was still in place. And when I was a freshman and sophomore, I think it was done by the time of the end of my sophomore year. And it was because the draft was in place, and which meant your number was called. So Jonathan, it would have been by your date of birth. What's your birthday?
March 30th.
March 30th? So March 30th would be given a number. It was on television. There was a big pulling of numbers out from 1 to 365. And then birth dates were put next to them. And number 1, those people were drafted first. So it was just by the luck of your birthday. And we would watch the draft lottery. And, you know, people were really aware of what was happening, not just because of the news, because that draft kind of drew everybody's attention, and the war was really controversial. And of course, being a prisoner of war would be, other than dying, would be, you know, one of the awful, or being seriously injured, you know, but one of the terrible, terrible things of war. So I was like, well, who is the POW? And I only know this cheerful Bruce Cram. And he said, I was. And during the time I was a prisoner of war, my family, my wife and children had no idea if I was alive or not. And it just really, that stayed with me. Part 2 is that we're looking for ways in church to invite each other to talk about faith in a deeper way. So when I talked to Bruce, I invited him to come here to talk about his faith and to talk about what it's meant to be part of a church community. And nobody wants to ask him to go into the detail of what it was like to be a prisoner of war, but it speaks to his character as a person that he survived that and has had a really pretty amazing life. So, Mr.
Okay, I'm Bruce Cram. I was born in Burlington, raised in Burlington, graduated from Burlington High School when it was up where the elementary school is now in 1939. Got out and went to work. I was a member of the K Company Vermont National Guard, the infantry at that time, and I didn't want to go to war as an infantryman. I wanted to go as a member of the Air Force. So I resigned from the Guard and joined the Air Force. I was married in 1941, and in December 7th, of course, the United States got into war. So in January of 42, I joined the Air Corps. It was the Army Air Corps at that time. They had so many sign up for cadet training that they couldn't absorb them in the system. So they put us in the reserve, and we just went on living our normal lives until we were called. And I was called in November of 1942 with a group from Vermont, went up to 40th and Allen, down to Fort Devens, and then we got on a train and went all the way up to Ohio and down to Nashville, Tennessee. And in the middle of the morning, when we get up at 5 o'clock in Nashville, the smoke was so thick you could chew it. It was terrible, and it was cold. But we survived for a month. That was our classification center. And we were shipped from there to Maxwell Field, Alabama for cadet training, parading around the fields. And because I had had a year in the Guard, I was put second in command of a group of about 2,000 cadets.
And you were 23 years old at that point?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we stayed there and took basic training in military protocol. And after a month, I went to Maxwell Field, Alabama. That's where we were. And they divided us up according to what our classification from Nashville had turned out to be. And I got in single engine fighter. So I went to primary training in Bennettsville, South Carolina. I went to basic training in Sumter, South Carolina. And I went to advanced training in Moultrie, Georgia. And from there I graduated and was commissioned and given my wings. And I was sent to Richmond, Virginia, where I checked out in P-47s. And we stayed there a short time and then went down to Norfolk in the middle of the Navy country. And we were flying P-47s, which they weighed 7 tons. And we weren't very maneuverable at low altitudes, and the Navy had some very agile planes. And every time we take off and go out over the ocean to do aerial gunnery, they'd come down and buzz us and try to dogfight with us. One day I said, I'm going to get even with them. And I was leading a flight of 4 to go out on the gunnery range. And I had briefed the 3 that were flying with me. And I said, when we get out over Chesapeake Bay, there's an aircraft carrier coming in. I said, you guys take off and go out, circle around away from it, because I'm going to pretend I'm going to land on it. So I made a pass around and dropped my wheels and headed on toward the deck. Well, flares went flying up and waved. The landing officer was waving his flags. I got, I don't know, 1,000 feet from them or something, and I pulled up my wheels and took off and left. But I thought I was getting even with them.
What kind of disciplinary action was taken?
I expected I might hear from the top brass, but I never heard anything. And anyway, we would go out over the ocean, and the B-26s would tow targets behind them. It would fly in a straight line, and we'd come up and go past them, and then we'd turn around and go back in and fire at the target. Our ammunition, the nose of the ammunition was all painted different colors for different flights. So when they brought the target back to the base and dropped it, you could look at it and see how much you hit it, how many times you hit it, if you hit it at all. Occasionally, one of the new guys would come up and hit too close to the plane and shoot the cable off and drop the target out over the ocean. And this used to make the B-26 pilots kind of mad because they didn't like to have us getting that close to them with the ammunition. Anyway, from there, at that point, I had 2 children. And at that point, I got shipped over to Europe, flew across the ocean. We landed at Reykjavik in Iceland, gassed up, flew on to Prestwick, Scotland, took a train into London, and then took a boat across the channel and landed at Louvain, Belgium, where the 36th Fighter Group was there with their P-47s. And I joined that group, and from there we moved 2 or 3 times in. One experience that was real great when we had moved up to the confluence of the Rhine River and the Moselle, and we had a little air base there. And the Army had taken over what's called the Remagen Bridge. It was a train bridge over the Rhine River, and we were right close to it. So we took off in a squadron of 12 ships one morning early and headed into Germany. And there was an abandoned airfield that the Germans had abandoned, but it was loaded with Stuka dive bombers. And they were all lined up and one after the other, and gassed up and bombed up and ready to go. And we hit them and destroyed about 35 planes on the ground. And I personally think we probably saved the Remagen Bridge because they obviously were there, moved in overnight with the idea of taking off and going and dive bombing the bridge. But I've never heard or seen anything in the Army records about that. But I've got pictures of it because after the mission was over with, as we flew back, I had a little candid camera with me. So I went over the airfield and took pictures of these planes sitting there. And I meant to bring them, but I forgot it. But anyway, got through World War II okay. I won the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Air Medal over there. And I came home, and I loved flying so much that I joined the Air National Guard and went to work at the bank. Flew with the Air National Guard when they were formed in '47. And along about '49, we traded in our P-47s for the P-51. And that's what we were flying then. And we were called up for active duty on February 1st, 1951. And at the end of that year, I was shipped over to Korea as a replacement pilot and started flying missions over Korea. Most of our missions that I was on in World War II and over there were ground support missions. We would get coordinates from the briefings that we were given, and we'd go out and find the coordinate and drop our bombs. They had a squadron of reconnaissance planes, and they would go out and scout around and try to find machine gun emplacements and so forth that we could strafe and bomb and so forth. After we would drop our bombs and so forth, we would go to just south of the North Korean capital and head back down south along the highway, because they would run convoys to supply the peace mission that was at Seoul, in that area. And they were allowed to have so many vehicles, and they had to have red markers on top of the hoods of the vehicles. And we were to check on them. And it was just a rotating thing. The flight would go and bomb and go around and come down. And they were pulling into a stop that day that I was there. And one of the vehicles didn't have the marker on it. So I always said, well, I'm going to take a picture of it with my aerial gunnery camera, but I'm not going to shoot anything. So I was leading a squadron, and I told the 3 persons with me to circle, and I went down on a low altitude mission and tried to get pictures of it. And somehow or other, I flew into a flak trap, and they hit my plane, and I pulled up, and I had no engine running. So I got up as high as I could and tried to bail out. I don't know what happened. My parachute, I had a back parachute, and it was hooked up somewhere. I just ended up rolling on the plane and sliding to the rear, hitting the horizontal stabilizer on my back, kicked my feet up in the air and pulled the ripcord. And the chute opened, and I swung once and came back and hit the ground. So I estimated I may have gotten out there about 300 feet. But anyway, I looked around, there wasn't any, well, there was an old farmer in sight. He was going up the hill and beside me. But he didn't want anything to do with an airplane flying over in trouble and the guy bailing out, screaming his head off to keep from passing out. And I took off my chute, put it under a little small bush, and then looked around, and up on the hillside there was a trench. So I went up and got into the trench, and there was a wooden bridge over it. So I got up underneath that, and I felt pretty good about it. I thought, well, they'll send in the helicopters and pick me up or something. I had a 2-piece radio set under my arm, which I took apart and put together. And I decided I better let the 3 guys that I'd left up in circling know that I was all right. So I put the piece up to my mouth, and I heard this grunt. I turned around, and there were half a dozen North Koreans there with their rifles. Needless to say, I didn't do any talking on the phone. And they marched me down to a village and put me on exhibit in the house. People would come in and look at me. And one old woman who apparently had been strafed or something, she came in and she was going to tear me apart. And they pulled her off and got her out of there. But I spent that night on a cement floor in a building which had an opening between the edge of the building and the ground, about a foot. And it was cold. It was the 17th of February. And no blanket or anything. That was my first night. And they picked me up the next day and started taking me around for interrogations. And they brought in meals 2 meals a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon late. And I couldn't eat the food. It was horrible. And I guess I went 4 or 5 days without eating. But I finally had to eat, so I started. If cabbage was in season, we had cabbage soup and rice. If potatoes were in season, we had potatoes and rice. Kelp and rice. Everything was rice. And the ladies would pick the rice, and it had a lot of chaff with it. And they had wicker baskets, triangular shape. They put the rice in, get out in the wind and throw it up in the air and catch it. The wind would blow the chaff off. But it didn't blow the rocks out. So every once in a while when you're chewing on the rice, you'd come across a rock. And I broke one of my teeth on it. And they didn't have any dental service or anything, so I got along. And I was kept in groups of 5 or 6, never in a POW camp as such. We went by camps and saw them, but January 1st of 1952, the Chinese were in the war and they started bacteriological warfare propaganda. So any pilots that were shot down and captured, they were kept separate. They weren't allowed to be together. As I say, we were in groups of 5 or 6. And the group I was in at that point, I was the ranking officer, so they would bring the food to me, and I'd divide it up between the 5 or 6 of us. And one day they came and they had, I thought they were gladiola bones. And I looked at them and I said to one of the guys, "What the heck is this anyway?" "Oh," he said, "that's garlic." I said, "Garlic? What do you do with it?" "Oh," he said, "you break it into cubes, divide it up, and each person gets some, an equal amount." I said, "Well, how do you eat it?" He said, "Just like an apple." Well, that shocked me because I remember my mother having garlic and rubbing it around the pan and throwing it away. Well, it turned out that it was a godsend because it gave the rice some taste and so forth, made it palatable. And they would give us a half a cup of sugar every week. And we were able to do what we wanted to with that. And we'd get up with the sun in the morning, go to bed with the sun at night. And no blankets, no heat, sleep on the ground. They'd march us up, get us up at 10 o'clock at night and go for a walk up the road. Go to a Korean village and stop in front of a house and tell us to sit down and wait, and they'd go in the house and pretty soon the Koreans would come out. We'd go in. I don't know what they did with the Koreans. I guess they probably went next door with their neighbors or something. But it seemed to me that it was pretty rough treatment for them too. But all the time I was there, a year and a half, I had one piece of meat. I had an oxen that stepped in a hole in the middle of the road and broke his leg. They had to kill it. And they took the meat and divided it up between the prisoners, which, as I say, we were in small groups, but we were spread around the village. They divided it up between us, the guards, and the villagers. And I got one piece about the size of what you'd get in a beef stew. And it turned out to be the eyeball. The group I was with had a South Korean pilot, not South Korean, South African pilot. he said, "Oh," he said, "that's a delicacy." I said, "What'd you get?" He showed me what he got. I said, "I'll swap with you." So he got the eyeball and I got a little piece of meat. But that was in the year and a half, that was the only meat I had. The water had to be boiled. You could try to escape, but it was worthless because the only food you could get would be out of Korean gardens, which were fertilized with human feces. And if you tried to eat their food, you'd get diarrhea badly. They would have us in a house beside of a brook or something. Across the brook, hanging from the tree, would be a dog with a rope around his neck, hanging there, live. And they'd be there starting in the morning. That poor dog would whine. By nighttime, he was dead. And I guess they took him, and the Koreans ate him, I guess. We never got any of it. But there was kind of funny days. The South African that I was with was a very, very smart guy. He never graduated from high school, but he did a lot of reading. And he was, I think, the smartest person I've ever seen. He taught us how to play chess. We take, when we go out walking or going on a work mission or something, if we find a twig alongside the road, we pick it up and bring it back, break it up into pieces, and then carve it into chess pieces. And he taught us how to play bridge. They were able to give us a deck during the day and tried to keep warm. Of course, you get snow on the ground in North Korea. It would never last very long, a day or two, and then it would melt off. We would be led down to the river to take a bath and strip down and get into the ice cold water, take a bath, and get back and put on our clothes. We had no towels to dry with or anything. And we'd go out on work missions. They took us out and we hauled logs back to the camp and dug a root cellar. Put the logs over it, covered it up. So they get a truckload of cabbage and it would all go in the root cellar. And the KPs that day would go in and pick up the cabbage that was starting to rot and bring it out. And that's what they cooked for us to eat. If it was potatoes, it was the same thing. And it was one thing for a month or month and a half at a time. Then it was the other thing. And then when they didn't have one of those potatoes or cabbage in season, they used kelp that they harvest from the ocean. I weighed 200 pounds when I was shot down. I weighed 120 when I came out. So, needless to say, I didn't eat very much, but I survived. And I say that my Boy Scout training is what helped me, because I had done a lot of camping. I was used to it. It was great to get out. As President Eisenhower started pushing to get a settlement in late 53, and things started to get better for us. They would put us into bigger groups. I ended up with about 20, and we were stationed in an old schoolhouse. And it was amazing. And I told you about the garlic. Well, the guards all had garlic too. And when they'd open the door and come in, you could smell the garlic on their breath. They'd come in and count us. Well, I never gave it a thought until later on. There were 20 of us laying on the floor in this place, all with the same garlic breath that the guard had. He must have hated to come in there. We had two guys that were brave, and they snuck out one day. There was a well down in the schoolyard, and they'd go down and get water to bring back and boil, so we could have something to drink. And they took the buckets, told the guard we were going down Causeway. They go down to the well and put the buckets down and sneak up to another group up above and get the latest news. Because the kitchen help had access to news. The rest of us didn't. So they'd get the latest news and bring it back. But the guards would come down and they'd come in and they'd start counting. We'd all get up and walk around and make it difficult. And finally they'd get mad and they'd point their rifle and say, sit down. So we'd sit down. They'd count 4 or 5 times, come up too short. So they go out and call the officer of the guard. In the meantime, the other 2 guys would sneak back and get him. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. The people that could speak English, we call them the interpreters, were pretty much all trained in English in the United States on Rockefeller Scholarship. That was interesting that they were over there and being used as interpreters. A lot of small details that you're hardly interested in, I'm sure. But
Bruce, those details help us see you as a young man in that situation, surviving each day.
the hard part of it was my wife was home with 2 kids and didn't know whether I was dead or alive. They shut off, they started that propaganda. We were putting chemicals in bombs and so forth. Biological warfare. They wouldn't give us any mail. They'd make us write letters home, and they'd take them, but they never mail them. So, never until, see, I came out in September, long about July, one of the guys that was in the camp had broken the rules and didn't pay any attention to what they wanted him to do. So they shipped him out of the camp and put him in our group. And he was from Worcester, Massachusetts. And he was getting his mail because he was shot down before I was, before the bacteriological warfare started. And so he wrote home to his folks and said, I've got a savings account at the Chittenden Bank in Burlington, Vermont. He said it'd be a good idea if you checked on it to see if it was okay. So his parents called the bank and they looked and they said, we don't find any record of any savings account. But whoever answered the phone was smart enough to think a little bit. We do have an employee that's on leave of absence that was shot down over in Korea. Maybe there's a connection. And that's what it turned out to be. Well, they got in touch with the FBI and so forth. And they went and told my wife. And said, don't tell anybody, because if word gets out, they'll shut off his mill. So she had to keep quiet about it, but it relieved her, of course, a great deal. Got out the 3rd of September 1953. Put us on the train and brought us down. It was a big, high, narrow railroad bridge over a flooded river. And they couldn't put the engines up on the trestle because they weren't safe. So they pushed our cars up on the trestle and then leave us sitting there. And we could look down about 150 or 200 feet. These logs would be coming down and running against the piers. It was kind of scary. And finally, they'd get an engine on from the other side and pull us off. Went into what they called Freedom Village. We were exchanged. I was in the last group with a general that was a prisoner. We'd walk up to the Red Cross tent, and these nurses were standing outside. And here's a year and a half, never seen a white female, never seen a woman with lipstick. And I blatted out, I said, my God, look at that lipstick. They all broke out laughing, they thought that was a joke. But we went inside, got some ice cream and some milk, and that was the first we had for a long time. They treated us pretty good. Put us on a boat to come home. We were 2 weeks coming across the Pacific and had interrogation every day as to what we did, what we saw, and so forth. Got home and they put us on a month leave, which was a great thing. My wife met me in San Francisco. We went to the top of the Mark, first night for dinner. I ordered a big cheeseburger and I said, well, I want a big sliced onion. She looked at me, she said, you don't eat onion. I said, you watch me.
And cabbage and eyeballs.
I learned to eat a lot of things. I'm not as picky as I used to be. Anybody have any questions?
Well, I've got one. How was your faith a part of this time that you spent? Where did your faith enter in or not during the time that you were a prisoner? Have people that you talked about God or your religion with?
Yeah, I knew the 23rd Psalm. And in our group, we would, not every day, but quite frequently, when we get down, we would recite the 23rd Psalm. And we encourage each other. God's going to take care of us. We'll get out of here. And it was what kept us going, really. I was going to tell you.
How old were your boys when you got home?
I get pardon?
Your boys were teenagers then when you got home?
No,
Not quite?
no. Steve was 5 and
Little.
Dave was 7 or 8.
They must have been pretty excited.
Yeah. After our stay at the Mark, needless to say, we didn't go out very much. We stayed in the room with I guess we were there 2 days, 3 days. And we flew home. And I didn't know it, but my wife did. Because she had come out there and met the boat when we in the DC-3 at the airport. And here's this big crowd of people, the St. Michael's ROTC band, and National Guard officials. And they had a big welcoming for me, and I didn't know it was going to happen at all. So I was quite surprised. Everybody on the plane just sat in their seats and let us get off. They didn't told, I guess. They presented me with a new car. A Studebaker coupe. One of those pointed things back in 53. It was quite exciting. Charles Stanley Jones was the minister of the church there. He came out to the house to see me. Harrison Cook, was president of the bank. He came out and he had lost his son in Corregidor and the Baton Peninsula. And so he was quite emotional talking with me. It was amazing to see a president of the bank sitting there crying. But yeah, it made me cry too.
I bet it did. Well, people didn't have any idea about what had happened to you, and they, you know, everybody has losses in war. I know when we were first talking about this, Bruce, you made a statement about war in general. I mean, we can certainly hear your heroic leadership of others, as well as your taking care of yourself. And I mean, just thinking of you as such a young man being a pilot, and some of the joy of learning to fly and that kind of thing. But you said some things about war in general. I think it would be good.
I wanted to start with this, and I forgot it. But I wanted to explain to this group that there's no glory in war. We lost over 400,000 men in Europe in World War II. We lost 38,000 in Korea. There were 103,000 wounded, and there were 800 and some odd missing in action, and they're still missing in action. And there's no glory in war. If I had my way, I'd outlaw it all over the world. But we're right in the midst of it. But all this metal stuff it's not to glorify the war. So, as young folks, you ought to know that and ought to work, try to keep peace. When you get mad at your friend and you're going to poke him in the nose, forget it. Make peace with him. Any more questions?
What I want to say is how much I think everybody's going to be really thinking about what you had to say and processing it and thinking about it. And over again, there were places where you could hear the strong connection you had with people around you, and those bonds of community that were really sustaining. And I think the only place in the story where you were completely by yourself were in the trench for about 5 seconds. And then in that first, when you were first, a prisoner of war. But all the rest of the time you're in community, and you know how great that you had the background of faith to help you sustain yourself and your friends during that time.
Yeah.
To have that connection.
It was important. At one point, there were only 2 of us together, and we were sitting in the Korean hut. There was a crack in the wall. We could see the kitchen, and there was a woman out in the kitchen. And she went to the oven, opened the door, and pulled out a cross, and held it up to let us know that she was a religious person. And she put it back in, and of course kept it hidden. They would have certainly taken it away from her. They may have shot her. They knew.
But she chose her moment, to show some solidarity with you.
Yeah. And the fellow I was with was a Catholic, so we sustained each other.
Well, I really appreciate it. I know everybody really appreciates you sharing and talking with us and sharing your story.